I want to begin with some basic points. Race is not real. Racism is real, and it is grounded in the idea of race. People do not see race, they imagine race. It is imagined race that people see. Racism signifies and constructs visible and outward bodily markers such as skin colour and language, as well as invisible and inward markers. Indeed, it is the very invisibility of Jews as a hidden threat to humanity that characterises anti-Jewish racism, for example. Racism has a prehistory and history in European representations of the other and racial science, and an intersectional history within capitalist social relations. Racism and nationalism were concurrent ideological developments and mutual reflections. Racism played an ideological role in European overseas colonialism. Racism has a history in the West, but racism also has an intersectional history beyond the West. As an ideology, the relationship of racism and capitalism is something to be understood through empirical inquiry. Anti-racism is the challenge of racist ideas. After all, as the sociologists Robert Miles and Malcolm Brown remark, individuals are not racist. It is an ideology that is racist. Drawing on Antonio Gramsci's concept of common sense ideology, Miles and Brown elaborate. An emphasis on racism solely as a false doctrine fails to appreciate that one of the conditions of existence of ideologies, which by definition constitute in their totality a false explanation, but which may nevertheless also incorporate elements of truth, is that they can successfully make sense of the world, at least for those who articulate and use them. Racism has traction because it offers a seeming solution to real-world problems. Anti-immigration racism amongst currents of the working class might appear to address the problem of a shortage of well-paid jobs or affordable housing, for example. It's worth further exploring here on Gramsci's notion of common sense ideology. Gramsci recognises that all people make sense of the world and the specific problems posed by reality through what he calls a spontaneous philosophy or contradictory consciousness. People's ideas tend to be, in the first instance, not critical and coherent, but disjointed and episodic, deriving from groups with opposing outlooks. Embryonic good sense is the healthy nucleus of an anti-dialectical, dogmatic common sense consisting of all prejudices from past phases of history that have left stratified deposits in popular philosophy. Vulgar common sense induces a state of submissiveness and conformity, exploiting an eagerness for certainties. Racism demonstrates how common sense appears to be a specific way of rationalising the world and real life, although a creation of concrete fantasy. So this notion of contradictory consciousness, in which two contradictory sets of ideas coexist, good sense, common sense, explains how people can have racist ideas by not fully questioning these ideas or not realising their own agency to provide alternative answers to social problems. Hegemonic racist conditions do not exist through a neat structure of social control or process of social consent, but rather through a grudging and partial acquiescence. Racism is not a fixed state. Gramsci recognises the role of organic intellectuals, anti-racists and educators in stimulating an active and reciprocal dialogue with people to challenge common sense and to develop embryonic good sense. In other words, racism as a common sense ideology can and must be overcome in the battle of ideas. Crucially, for all racism, it is a process of racialization, as a dialectical process of signification, of giving meaning to, that characterises and organises human beings into supposedly distinct and opposing racial groups of self and other, and creates this idea of race. The moment of racism as ideology is one in which self and other simultaneously embrace and repel by reference to a set of imagined attributes that carry a duality of evaluations, negative and positive. Conceptually, this is its unity, but historically, the ideological content, the specific groups represented as self and other, and the consequences have always been diverse. Racism is an ideological distortion of how we see people, how we see human beings and our social relations, which has and is capable of drawing upon a range of indicators of self-perpetuating supposed racial difference and inferiority, superiority. Crucially, when anti-racist politics takes the form of an identity politics, there is a danger of essentialising race, of giving race a reality, an authenticity and a fixed solidity. When anti-racism makes race real, the ideological struggle against racism is immeasurably more difficult. The sociologist Robert Miles, back in 1989, in his original Routledge Key Ideas book, Racism, cautions against a colonial model of racism, a particular dominant academic framework for seeing racism and building an anti-racist politics. Understanding racism exclusively through European or Western colonialism ignores a more expansive history and geography of racism and deflates the concept of racism. In the context of geography education, this raises an important question. How can decolonisation be part of a more expansive comprehension of what racism is and what kind of anti-racism we need? Acknowledging that racism is not confined to Western colonialism is an opening, not a closure. We should continue to teach and interrogate our discipline's imperial past as part of a wider contemporary geographical project of anti-racism and social justice. We should be able to expose the history and legacy of colonialism and slavery that has and continues to negatively racialise human beings through the somatic marker of skin colour. We should be able to teach about the racialised and ideological underpinnings to contemporary Western imperialism. However, a more expansive comprehension of the history and geography of racism teaches us that, for example, the racialised concept of civilisation, which was a central discursive justification for the European colonisation of the non-European world, was a racist concept reproduced in colonialism, but not one that originated from it. The civilising mission, as Miles has shown, originated within feudal Europe and from the processes of social differentiation, creating social difference, initiated by the ruling class to legitimise their rule, which subsequently, with the spread of capitalist relations of production, developed to connect the interior with the exterior of the European world. The French aristocracy, for example, mobilised the idea of polités and civilité to contrast their refined behaviour with those they ruled over, who were considered inferior people. During the 19th century, the peasantry of southern and western France were seen by scholars and politicians as savages and barbarians, whose material conditions of existence were considered the result of their inner nature and race apart. The Parisian bourgeoisie of the early 19th century, influenced by phrenology and its key role in racial science, commonly understood the working class through assumed differences of race, saw the working class as a distinct physical type with a set of somatic characteristics that expressed their supposed physical and moral degeneration. On occasion, these representations went as far as associating the working class with animal features that symbolised their purported subhumanity. The point here is that racism and its civilising mission has not only been integral to colonialism, it has been fundamental to the legitimisation of ruling class rule and nation state building, and to the creation and advancement of capitalist social relations inside and beyond Europe. A colonial model of racism rarefies race. That is, it makes the abstract idea of race into a supposedly concrete and real difference amongst humankind. Moreover, its exclusive focus on European or Western white colonialism of the non-white rest of the world restricts consideration of racism to a white over black relationship in colonial, post-colonial and internal colonial settings, to the exclusion of both colonised populations beyond this colour line and non-colonised populations. Put differently, quoting Alistair Bonnet from his book Multi-Racism, a singular focus on Western power and non-Western submission or resistance is not just dated, it is Eurocentric. The latest Peoples Under Threat report from the Minorities' Rights Group from 2021 is illustrative of this point. This table also indicates a way forward vis-a-vis geography in schools. We can be both committed to a project of decolonisation and teach the geography of racism in an expansive way, which attunes to its ideological intersectionality with the full range of nationalisms, nation-states, colonialisms, imperialisms and ever-changing capitalist social relations that exist in our world. Furthermore, we can teach the geography of anti-racism in a way that frees us from the straitjacket and essentialism of identity politics. Okay, I will leave it there.